blockchain can help us to solve the problems humanity is actually facing. Well, big headline, but we have really great experts here. They just want to say something. No, two things. First of all, we just have one microphone here for the whole room. Okay, so if you over there, guys, hey, 100 meters away, say hello. Well, welcome again. So if you would like to discuss with us, just choose a seat here over there, because then the microphone is nearer and we can listen to your questions, okay? So, and second thing, I just want to tell you, I'm working now as moderator since, I don't know, 15, 20 years, dedicated to digital and future topics. This is the first time I see, I think, more women in the audience than men. So it's really a great day for me here. And this is such a technical topic. Great! And now let's directly come to the really important persons here on stage. So I would like to invite you to introduce yourself. What do you do in your daily work, and what is the most important question you're actually dealing with?
Hi everyone, my name is Carolyn Reckhow. I work with ConsenSys. We just saw Sarah Mills speak, and before him, her Rouven, also at ConsenSys. It's a venture studio that's building decentralized applications, mainly using Ethereum. It also does a lot of other things, including we've got a coding bootcamp, and we do some consulting for Fortune 500s and different nation states. A lot of stuff, mainly based on Ethereum. I've been with them for 3 years. I'm director of operations at the company, and that means a lot of different things. But essentially, I've been scaling the company. We're over 600 folks right now, 600 people worldwide. So my job right now entails a lot of travel. I work in strategic expansion and growth. So we're growing on the west coast of the United States. The main office has been in New York. And I most recently have moved to London, because we're growing in London and Paris and hopefully soon Berlin. And day to day, I am thinking a lot about how to design processes and structures for a decentralized organization, because we are a company that is not structured like a typical hierarchy. We are doing things differently, like the blockchain does things differently. So that's what I do day to day. Excited to be here. Thank you, Carmen, and thank you for putting on this conference.
Welcome, Caroline.
Yeah, I'm based in Berlin, so nice to hear that ConsenSys is coming to Berlin. That's a great news. My name is Andrea Bauer, and I'm working in, I have my own consultancy on future technologies and applying this for businesses. Since more than 10 years now, and I just published a book actually, which is called The Crypto Economy, which is actually based on discussions that I had with different experts. We started with the surveillance topic, went into the future of money, what governance mean in blockchain, how art is related with blockchain. This was a discussion that I had with Marsha, for instance, who could not be here unfortunately today. And and actually asking, when you ask, what are the biggest, what was the question, what is the biggest challenge?
You're actually facing it.
I'm facing, and it's actually what it's just, keep there, or kind of, cope the speed of what's happening in this crypto and blockchain realm these days. Because it's really, when we talk about these exponential technologies, this technology really proves, how extremely fast it is evolving. And I think the growth of ConsenSys is also showing this intensely, how many people are jumping into this area right now and making it real in a way, and that it's transforming from a very strong narrative where a lot of people now playing with. And I'm excited, about seeing, how it is evolving, and just, keep up the speed.
Great, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Kreutler. I work at Gnosis right now, which was one of the original ConsenSys companies, has recently spun out to an independent company that's based in Berlin. So as creative director, I encounter a lot of design questions from day to day, whether it's similar to Sarah Mill's last talk, kind of the user experience of blockchain, and what that means if transaction times are anywhere from 10 seconds to 5 hours, what do you do in a user interface? But as well as larger questions in terms of how do we communicate blockchain to the broader world, and how do we communicate it to very varied audiences, in terms of making it more accessible, but also I think in terms of making it legible or illegible to existing power structures so that it doesn't become just like the last new tech stream or kind of tech castle that came before it. And I think also with this question, it's very important to bring more diverse voices into the audience. And also at Gnosis, I do some community organizing work, and we recently opened a co-working space together with Cosmos in Berlin called Full Node. It's a 1,000 square meter space in Kreuzberg, and about 20 different blockchain companies are joining us there. And the idea of it is to really make the technology more mature. And there's a lot of promises that blockchain has made, and I think a lot of those promises we'll talk about on the panel. But hopefully this space of collaboration in Berlin can deliver on some of them.
Thank you, Kia. So, you know, blockchain is a really broad topic. I would like to know from you, how would you describe it really shortly in your own words, and what topics are included for you?
Sure. I mean, a basic definition that I have working on blockchain is that it's cryptographic protocol that allows a distributed ledger or a public consensus on a history of events. So there's a public history and an agreement on events happening over time. And I think that is actually potentially the easiest way to position blockchain historically, because you understand the actors that have contributed to kind of consensus reality. So that's maybe on the more narrative technical side what blockchain means to me. But also I think blockchain, even more so than a technical infrastructure, is really a tool to shape culture at the moment in the technology space, but as well as in the arts, in the humanities and political spheres, and that it's something that allows us to think through, I don't know, with blockchain becoming so popular, I never imagined to have so many friends be like, oh yeah, bureaucracy, so exciting, so great, like that we can think about these new like governance structures. But I think it's really good as a conceptual and technical framework to get people interested in governance and interested in politics in a way that doesn't involve the usual suspects.
Yeah, blockchain. It is, I think, first of all, an extremely strong narrative. And I think it feeds a lot of minds, and it's a wonderful creative exercise that we, I think, see right now. In the sense, you know, that it's kind of, because all the areas that it is applied, you know, it also shows that it's more, it's not a disruptive technology, it's really a fundamental technology, what we're seeing, and if people really learn, you know, how to kind of apply, you know, what does it mean, you know, to create like this distributed or like decentralized infrastructures, and going, you know, from an understanding, you know, it's not about a network, it's more like creating an ecosystem, you know, but how is an ecosystem differently to a network, and I think it's it's almost a big mind shift that we see, and that it's now reflected, you know, in the way we're creating technology. And I think right now we're able to kind of, you know, face and play around with this decentralized idea. And I would even say, I think we are coming, being an economist, I think we are coming from a distributed or a decentralized economy already. And I think the last years formed like massive monopolies, and they failed in a way, in many ways, and a lot of crises came out of it. And I think it's a fascinating thing, you know, that people, community, you know, under the radar, develop this technology to such a level, because a lot of people who are working in the field, you know, as technicians say, actually the technology is not super new, you know, and it's like a lot of old ideas from the beginning of the internet are actually applied. And, but still, you know, it's get put together in a totally new form, and I think this is the exciting part in it. So it's, yeah, it's a huge mind shift in the technological world. So let's see what comes out.
Yeah. You can say something, but you don't have to.
No, I don't have too much more to say. I agree. It's a great technical definition. I agree that I don't like to think about it as a disruptive technology, but a foundational technology. Disruptive technologies were platforms like, Uber, or things that came out of the way we think about, really commerce in the traditional sense and putting them on the internet. And with blockchain, this is really like a paradigm shifting technology and way of thinking about interacting with communities and with your peers that kind of takes out existing power structures, and there's just a lot of potential.
Thank you very much. I don't want to jump on the detail area with the next question, but I would like to know from you, what do you think, in which parts of our lives will we see the biggest changes through blockchain in the next years? Just to give us some headlines for the further on discussion. What is your bet on it? Andrea.
I think we talked about it, before we had a little conversation, of course, before this panel, and I think what is the most, historically very interesting moment was by the beginning of this year when we had this kind of Bitcoin crisis. And probably you remember and followed it, the Bitcoin just within 2 weeks lost half of its value. And it was like shocking news everywhere, and it's kind of exciting that it has such a huge, it was such a huge topic, and everyone was talking about it. That even you don't have to be even people who were not in the space, and I think what I see is that there are so many. What's the reason? So I thought about it, and I thought there are so many narratives that this technology is kind of irritating, and it starts with the narrative of money, and this is the main thing why the discussion came up. But the narrative of the money is actually the business model of a nation state. And when you go then back, you see, okay, these are like grown power structures in the end, and there's also the whole identity, who we are, and and how we are interact, and our rituals and everything, and how we're doing business. And so what the massive thing that is changing is, first of all, the way we are constructing our money system. And with this, a lot of power structures are now getting irritated. And even if now people, or also Germany and France, they're now coming up with a Vorschlag or a proposal for thank you for how to regulate actually the cryptocurrencies. But still, I think that they can give a framework, but the technology is moving so fast that it's even today that the blockchain is not. A lot of technologies are more like distributed ledger technologies. It's probably better, a better term than blockchain. So what is irritating, I think, our identity as a community is changing massively, and also I think Rouven also had a talk today about the identity topic itself. I think this is really a core topic, how we are who we are in a society, and not in a national society, but in a global society.
Yeah. Good point. Anything to add?
I agree that I think identity is something that's going to pop up in the next couple of years, but it's really hard to predict. You guys are all in crypto, you know how quickly it moves, and how something like CryptoKitties can just pop up and, oh wow, that was really big this year, who would have predicted that? I don't know, but maybe I think that actually could give us some signals, right? We should look to games, right? If you think about the internet and think about some of the things that are the first actual real adopters and users of the internet were, I hate to say this, but it was the gaming, it was like gambling and gaming and pornography, and it was criminals. So
yeah,
I'll say that.
And just one short point to add, I think it was also brought up in a presentation earlier today in our product. It said that we don't necessarily need to make money with this product. And that's a quite strange sentence to hear in terms of doing business model canvassing. And I think that because there is a fair amount of capital in this space with a lot of projects that really will deliver on the applications that they're promising, that we'll see a lot more of open protocols and open standards in the tools that we're using for digital infrastructure. Like in the way that Mozilla now has like the DAP protocol and IPFS you can access through the browser and do decentralized web. I think that might be one of the things that has the first widespread kind of very subtle adoption that changes people's lives. Because people don't necessarily need to have business models for the things that they're producing. It produces a totally different type of open source protocol. So I'm really excited about that.
Okay. Very much. So, as mentioned, we wanted to talk about what positive impact can blockchain bring in our lives. So, let's start with something concrete. Like, what do you think? What environmental impact will blockchain have? For example, how can blockchain startups contribute to the society? I don't know who of you know these names like Electron, Solar Coin, Electric Chain, Solar Chain. I think you may know these names. Tell us something about.
Sure, yeah, so there are, like in a lot of different sectors, the environmental sector, the sustainability sector, there's very interesting projects that are popping up. You know, I mean, supply chain has been talked about, and if you really think about, the provenance of goods and the fair trade problem, blockchain is a proposed solution, and there are several different projects out there working on tracking the different suppliers of where a product like food or a piece of clothing to make sure that there's no slave labor involved, or food to make sure that where this fish is coming from is actually coming from an environmentally sustainable, like farmed in a good way, rather than something that's actually has a negative impact to the environment. So that's one example. You mentioned some of these energy startups, and there's a couple ways that can affect the environment. And one is the tracking of renewable energy credits through blockchain and being able to more seamlessly transact. And it's really about incentivizing people to be better actors and to gamify the system so people want to earn these renewable energy credits. So those are a couple examples.
I think that the sustainability topic is, of course, it feels a little bit with blockchain, it's like the Achillessehne of the whole technology. Because on one hand, I really like the idea of these distributed smart grids and kind of, come up with new models. And as you said, there are many examples where we're kind of going back, going to a kind of a distributed energy grid system, which is definitely something, that needs to happen, like soon. And but at the same time, the processes of the technology is super unsustainable, as we know, using like tons of energy just because of these consensus mechanisms. And I think this is a little bit a thing which needs to be solved. And people work on it. I'm not a technician, but I'm just following it. But it's but this is actually this was actually also the start. This was when South Korea said, okay, we want to regulate it because it eats so much energy away from our whole system, and they kind of said, okay, we need to proportion it to all the miners. And this kind of people think this was the initial reason why the Bitcoin went down so massively. Achillessehne of the technology, I say.
Because this is a topic popping up again and again when we're talking about drug as is, the energy question. So you mentioned there are actually people working on this solution. Do you have, just a question into the blue, do you have something in mind, some organizations, some guys who, in your opinion, find a maybe quite good solution to solve that problem?
I'm in contact a lot with Fab City guys, and what I really like with them, because they already have a grid, with all these fab labs of a decentralized fabrication. So they are very much into this digital fabrication. And in the end, I had just lately a discussion with them when I organized a stage in Kazakhstan for a grassroots movement driving sustainability, actually. And we had a nice conversation there on how they want to kind of come up with a token who who kind of just produces things or that makes digital fabrication easier and more resource efficient. So I think these kind of examples are very hands-on, can be a good prototype for thinking about energy or how to save energy in the whole production line or in the supply chain line. So so this is the only one where I'm closer on, I would say, but maybe.
Okay. So for environmental questions, let's have a look at humanity. What do you think are there possibilities that blockchain can help to close the gap between the rich and poor regions in the world?
So I mean, I think it's an incredibly broad question, so it's very difficult to give one answer to this, because it's always who is putting the tools in someone's hand, who's building the tools, and generally kind of less top-down approaches work better in terms of narrowing the gap between any inequality. I would say that it is an incredibly powerful tool to have applications that can send money between people without another authority. A lot of it is having the technology to be able to use those applications. And I think one of the biggest questions in the space, and we've kind of touched around it, is identity. And to me, identity is also an issue of equality, not necessarily wealth, but identity is often, and your ability to be anonymous is actually often correlated to how much wealth you have. So when we're talking about kind of issues of equality in developing countries, which is usually what's suggested here, I almost wish there could be a kind of force of law through blockchain of where you're allowed anonymity in direct proportion to how vulnerable you are, rather than the inverse. And I think that that's something that blockchain could do. I don't know if we actually have the power to make that happen, but that's what I would like to see as the first step there. If that makes sense.
Any acts?
That's interesting. I've never heard that proposal before, but yeah, that makes sense to me. I think with this question, there's so many different ways that you can answer it. There's all these examples that we saw. The BitPesa presentation this morning, where we're empowering folks to be able to have access to financial services that they now previously didn't have access to through these mobile applications, financial services on the blockchain. Identity, again, huge use case, and I think that I definitely agree with that statement that that identity is the core of empowerment. And if you think about the refugee use case, right? There are people that they depend on having an identity that their identity belongs to the nation state that they live in. It doesn't belong to them. It's their passport. And once a nation state ceases to exist, then their identity ceases to exist. If you're a stateless human and you have no paperwork and you walk to another country, like that's a problem. And self-sovereign identity, ePort, things like that, propose a solution to empower the most vulnerable populations in society, and that's really exciting. But when it comes to sort of larger social forces and societal forces, I again agree that it depends on who's designing these things and taking, again, user-centric perspective is very, very important, and involving as many diverse people as we can in thinking about some of these are really big economic problems that we're asking and we're trying to tackle with blockchain, and we're not going to solve everything if it's white men in the room again, solving the problems and designing the solutions. So yeah, diversity is very important.
Thinking about rich and poor, I think they're actually the Bitcoin first blockchain is actually a very bad example on kind of that wealth is more distributed, I would say, because in the end the technology is in the end building a hierarchy, and we know that it's just a fraction of the people. The most richest people in that system, it's a handful of people. When you consider how many people own bitcoins. So with this, I think this is more a bad example. So we should consider not building hierarchies in the system by the beginning, and people can define this from the beginning in the end, I guess. What I'm excited about is more like this whole discussion about the token economy, which is coming up. And this is actually related to that actually microtransactions are like incentivized, and with this you can earn money. And I think, you know, the variety of tokens and the definitions of what you can do and how you can get incentivized is an interesting exercise. The question is now how you can translate this wealth into the real world. Because rich and poor means, you know, in the real world, of course, like, do you have access to resources? And because if you live in an area where there's no water and no food to grow or whatever, then you maybe, you know, need a logistics system which brings you that. And and this is more like building up a smart system with this, in this tokenized world. I think it's an interesting exercise. But of course, we are in the beginning of this, and there's a discourse and all these tokens and the varieties. It's just about, you know, to start. But I think this could be an interesting mechanism to kind of, you know, more make it more equal. But it's also, if we allow it as a society, it's another question, I think.
Yeah, you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really interesting. Everyone's very excited about incentivization at the moment, which I think holds a lot of opportunity. But as was mentioned, designers need to know about game theory, about mechanism design, and it's incredibly important. But there is a certain point, especially looking at game theory, where incentivization, whether it's through tokens or something else, looks very close to coercion. And something, like there's a really good meme, I think Ralph Fiennes in the movie, I don't know if you guys have seen it, like Ralph Fiennes on a phone, it's from Taken 2, and he's arguing to get his daughter back, and it's become a meme. And the top says like, I have very unique skills I'm willing to tokenize and put on the blockchain as like his ransom to get his daughter back. So I think that there's so I think there's a lot of exploitation that's possible too with tokenization and incentivization.
Yeah, let's talk in a little deeper way about the challenges of blockchain. So, are there any drawbacks you're seeing? What are the risks of blockchain? No, we start with you, Andrea.
Skynet, that's the risk, and we all know it. And it's a little bit, you know, the thing what I'm a little bit concerned about is that right now talking about blockchain is that it seems like an ideological discussion, you know, with all these positive words around it, and it's like trustless system. And the thing is, just when you look at the word or from the sociological point, what trust is, there is no community, there is no business, there's nothing, there's not even a family without trust. This is the core element of us as a community. But history proved that we're very busy in kind of, you know, getting the risk out of the trust thing. Because when you look at trust, you look into the future knowing that there could something bad happen, but you somehow trust in it that it will turn out good. So you still do it, but there's this risk in it. And when you look into, you know, the money system, so kind of, you know, having the institution as an intermediary of trust. If you look then into the digitalization, then you see that trust transformed into a kind of a form of proof. It's not something that you're guessing is happening when you make a payment, and you trust the system only when there is a huge green check on the end of the process. So in the digital world we are going, that trust is more and more disappearing and forming into control actually. So, and when we're now talking about like that blockchain, the blockchain system is a trustless system, I have to say I'm a little bit concerned. Because what is happening with us as a society if trust is not there anymore, and actually we're building a control system. And I think this is the proper word for it. And it's more that we have to think about it, what we are like creating, and it's not trustless, it's not good.
Good point.
I guess my comment is a bit more of a call to action to the blockchain community. You know, I think that we're doing a really great job of talking about, starting to do a great job of self-regulating, and especially when it comes to all the token hype and the ICOs that have happened, and real regulation is coming as well, but the community in some areas is standing up and saying, like, okay, let's think about the ethics here, let's think about protecting the consumer, let's think about all the things that could go wrong when you're doing these ICOs and you're selling tokens and cryptocurrency and all this stuff, and that's great. But I think that there needs to be a broader discussion in the blockchain community around like ethics just as a competency, in the same way that lawyers that think about ethics, and that's just a part of their education, and there's a whole segment of lawyers that just think about that. In the same way we were talking earlier about biotechnology and biology, there are people that all they do is think about the ethics of biotech and biology. And I think that as we're building out new blockchain systems that involve people, right? Because as Sarah said, blockchain is all about people. You can't do it without groups of humans. There needs to be a competency within blockchain. People are just thinking about the ethics of blockchain design.
Yep. We have a question dedicated to ethical questions of blockchain. But before we jump there, I want to know from you, what do you think, how does blockchain will change the way we work in the next 5 or 20 years? Choose a number you like to discuss about.
ConsenSys is a great example.
Yeah?
Of work.
On work. Okay. That's something that I think about every day, and I work on within ConsenSys. As I mentioned that ConsenSys is a decentralized organization. We really think about the future of work and being on the forefront of what it means to work for a modern, innovative firm today. And we really encourage transparency and autonomy, and we say that we call ourselves the ConsenSys mesh, where we think of every individual and every team as a node in a network, and we all come together to form a mesh. And there's self-emergent teams who will come up and solve problems, and we really believe in fluidity, and that's an important part of the future of work. And as we're building out structures and systems for this, right now we don't have a whole lot of blockchain integrated into how we run our company, but the plan is to actually eat our own dog food, is the term, and try out some of this stuff internally and think about how can we use blockchain and tokens for governance, for making decisions across the company about how it's run. How can we use blockchain and tokens to incentivize collaboration, right? To maybe use bounties to get people to do work across the organization, to get folks to collaborate towards services in the company that are common good, rather than working just on your one project over here that's gonna ICO make you money. And there's a lot of interesting things that we're thinking about and that can be applied to a lot of different firms and a lot of different organizations, and anywhere you see groups of people coming together to work on a project. And there's a lot of interesting ways you can think about how blockchain, what that means for the future of work.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I very much agree. And there's certain projects out there right now, like Colony or Aragon. Colony allows you to work on distributed teams, and often with blockchain apps for working together, they're reputation-based. So you can say this person contributed this much to this project, or they had this quality, and basically the same way you kind of sign on and verify that this is true about this person. So I think that blockchain will actually introduce a whole new series of apps for reputation-based distributed working together. And that both has good and bad sides in terms of, it could incentivize contributing to a project, being on deadline. It could also incentivize not speaking out when you don't like how a certain project is going or you disagree with a decision, because it might not improve your ranking. And, these are the things we always talk about with like social media or anything. But I would say that everyone who's interested in in blockchain and working in distributed teams should maybe try out like a beta colony thing with some friends and try to work on like an art project or some other sort of project to get a group community organizing going, and just try that out now, because that will be a huge asset in 5 years when you know how these reputation systems work, and you'll be able to learn a lot more and do a lot more in your workplace later and actually be like very far ahead, I think.
I think this is really exciting. In which direction we are transforming right now, and I think ConsenSys is a great example, and the growth of it in the last month is, I think, speaks for its own. And I also think that working in more feels more like working in an organism, like in a kind of, because all these huge hierarchies, you know, they're built like an army in the end. And now it's like, I really like this one book from Lalue, Reinventing Organizations, you know, and it's really nice, you know, how he also describes it as a kind of also a mindset shift of consciousness that now, you know, that it's kind of the natural next, you know, evolution of how we think and organize ourselves, but it's also an interesting thing, you know, how do we qualify our co-workers and who we're working with, and this certification part is an interesting one, because I also think, you know, that there are also these micro certifications probably, you know, that you were in this project, that and you know, and your soft skills and your outcome, and so there were gonna be like a lot of qualification, certification you can probably earn on the way, but also there is also no forgetting in this world, you know. So if you like once did something wrong, it will follow you forever, and so it's also a thing, you know, where I think, you know, this moment of forgiveness or merciness or like these kind of, you know, elements are also, it's a little bit critical, I think, you know. So really to evolve yourself into a different identity, maybe, is going to be much harder, I think. You can earn certificates, but you can also lose some reputations, you know, on the way. And so this is something where I think it could be also very critical.
And you personally, do you see it more like positive?
Sorry, you personally, do you see it more like a positive or negative thing than at the end?
I think like working in organisms, I like a lot, actually, and also globally, you know, and this is where I really like, you know, that the world like gets together in a new format. This is great. I'm a little bit concerned, especially about, you know, some ethics, you know, also work ethics. It's a new discussion in the end. It's hard, you know, to give an answer on this, because there are different work cultures, first of all, you know, and just, you know, when you look into nation state, how Germans work and how French people work, and, you know, who said it yesterday, like the 6 hours, someone said, you know, I have the 6 hour day and I manage everything in 6 hours, you know, and this is shifting, of course, like, and others say, okay, no, I'm the workaholic, you know, and it's, yeah, it's a discussion. It's a new format of an ethical discussion which needs to be held.
Yeah.
Absolutely get it. So it directly links us to the next question. Who should be the people who discuss moral and ethical questions and aspects of blockchain? So is it a global questions, and what kind of questions should we ask ourselves? Is it a question, for example, should be discussed from the worldwide greatest experts or from the worldwide community in humanity? What do you think?
Everyone. Agree. I think, you know, the technology says it already. It's borderless, and it's and right now it's they're only the technicians, the business people, and the lawyers are discussing it right now. And there needs to be the anthropologists, the sociologists, the spiritual people, you know, who kind of, you know, to really, because if you're not, because we put our culture into the code. And this is the thing, and our culture is diverse, and I think, you know, and there are, Einstein said, you know, that everything is relative, and your position is different than mine and yours, and all the different positions are important. So, because otherwise it will not sustain and will not be healthy for us, I think.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, but
How can we get the people in the boat to vote?
Events like this, you know, taping it, putting it out to the web, starting the discussion is the most important thing, and it's not there. It's just about to start, and and I think it needs to get out of the tech corner. And needs to get into all the faculties that we know, and events like this.
do you have some proposals? What kind of questions we should ask ourselves when we discuss this African moral questions of blockchain?
Kia.
I mean, I could say again on the identity issue of who's using these systems, how much anonymity do we allow them, as well as why am I designing this and why do I want to be a part of the blockchain ecosystem? I think that's actually a first thing for anyone to ask themselves wherever they are, and so why am I here, in a general sense. And just kind of, but I really think just looking at identity, who you're designing these systems for, if you can give affordances to people who might need them in the future, and to ask that about every design question you make, about every funding decision you make, it's very important.
Yeah, those are all really good questions. I think why am I here? Yeah, those are not easy questions to answer, and you know, the user-centric questions, super important. When Sarah Mills was talking about research, this is what she needs to ask. Like, what are the questions? You know, she's got a whole stack of them. But you know, I think you also, I'm a big history nerd. That's kind of why I got into blockchain in the first place. So, you know, my background is in social sciences, and so actually, I think it's cool that we're all up here. You know, like art background, and economics, and social sciences, psychology. Great diversity. You know, the questions that we're asking need to come from all these sorts of disciplines, and not just from the business folks and the technologists. And we need to ask ourselves, you know, take a look at history and say, are we building systems that are like repeating history in a negative way? Because that's just a recipe for failure. And you see that if you know history, you know that. But it's surprising how few people don't know history.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. It's and history is full of examples where we kind of, you know, came up with dystopian ideas and created with utopian ideas and created dystopian world in the aftermath. And I think the internet even is an example for that. And I think you know, people who are working in the industry for a long time, 2013 was a shocking year when Edward Snowden said, by the way, this is what the NSA is doing, and not just the NSA, but a lot of other you know, systems or institutions that we created. And I think, and in the end, you know, at the beginning they were also, the internet, it should bring more democracy, it should be the long tail. Chris Anderson preached it like up and down. And what we got in the end were like data superpower monopolies and a huge surveillance system, which was the biggest nightmare that no one could really imagine. I mean, the CCC Club, they had no title in this year because they said, we're speechless, and these are the biggest nerds in the world. And the content is like sorted out by advertising mechanisms, most of them. So it's not what the founding fathers and mothers intended to happen in the end. And so the biggest question is, in the end, also with blockchain, is how do we not build another dystopian world out of something which sounds so amazing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
And yeah, one of my favorite books on this topic that you both bring up is called Seeing Like a State. It's by James C. Scott, and the subtitle to the book is How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. So it goes through early stage forestry in terms of marking trees, and then all the way up through monoculture, and we've kind of destroyed the agricultural industry through monocultures. But even standardization of names, standardization of identity systems, and also standardizing the countryside and people living in the countryside, and looking how often trying to create a more logical system has resulted in something very dystopic, and recommend that book a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's jump to politics. I think what influence will blockchain have on politics and the work and structure of governments, democracy, all this?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of governments out there that are interested in blockchain and are, you know, looking at identity or looking at all sorts of different things that happen in, you know, typical bureaucracies, and thinking about how blockchain can make it, you know, more efficient and better and more equitable. But, you know, honestly, when I really think about big picture blockchain and governments and nation states, you know, I see the rise of blockchain as, you know, on a similar trajectory as the decline of the nation state. I think those two things are related, and I think blockchain is going to enable different communities and groups of people to be able to govern themselves and to serve a function, as you were kind of hinting at, that nation states do nowadays. I think that's the long view.
Yeah, also I think that the narrative of a nation state is getting very much disrupted through this kind of borderless governance systems that we are creating with this, because we can suddenly, I think that there's a multiverse of communities get created, of people who are kind of sharing a kind of certain mindset. And it's not the language, it's not the rituals, it's not the location anymore. And it's really like, okay, it's like many communities, if it is like the ConsenSys community, or if it is the Fab City community, you know, or whatever, and they're all kind of overlapping. So you're going to be part of many identities probably, which is also natural, you know, we are already doing this. I think it feels almost rigid for people who like work more and more like international, and they say, yeah, so you're German or you're like English or whatever, and I meet more and more people who are like, I think this digital nomad a movement, you know, is not just happening per se. It's because people say, okay, I want to move more, I want to have another identity, and I think, yeah, the nation state narrative will definitely kind of, it will morph into something else. It will have another role, and yeah.
So I'd probably play a bit of a contrarian here and say that I don't necessarily think that blockchain is not assemblable by a nation state, and we see kind of the crypto ruble and other nation states really kind of embracing blockchain technology. And whether you call it blockchain, because it might not be a public ledger, is one question. But I think that they're not so incompatible as people might like to believe. And yes, it's certain borderless transactions, but there is still a geographic concentration of miners and wealth quite often. And I would also say that I think it will distribute a lot of political power to other places, and this isn't to say that it isn't extremely important to do that, but there's also a certain monopoly on military strength or other things that the nation state still really does control. So I think it's very important, in the same way that we say, you know, decentralize everything, to realize the points of centralization that are still there, that cryptographic protocols are weapons themselves, but they aren't all the weapons, and we have to think about what a state really does, in addition to identity, in addition to borders. And I think it's a good thing to have a multiplicity of options, but I think that the idea of nation states is probably going to stick around for a while, and they will incorporate crypto into them.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a look at the time. That's fine. Oh, we are cool with the time. I want to round out the panel with a question you developed on your own in our exchange before this panel. You wanted to discuss about which groups of people will blockchain newly empower, and what does that tell us about the fundamental nature of money and economics? First, which groups of people will blockchain newly empower? You wrote down the question, I think, Carolyn, yeah. And what does that tell us about the fundamental nature of money and economics? You wanted to write down this question, Carolyn.
I know. I think we got to a lot of the different answers to this question already. And I think that's why after our conversation, yeah, that this is sort of like a bit of a question that ties a lot of things together, right? Is you know, when you're thinking about the fundamental nature of blockchain technology, you're pulling out established intermediaries and established institutions that right now are required in society for humans to interact and transact and to trust each other. And the question of, you know, which groups of people will blockchain newly empower? I mean, lots, but I think the important ones are you know, different groups of people. Groups of people that previously have been disempowered. The individual, right? I think if we really think about blockchain as a fundamental solution to the identity problem. And so self-sovereign identity, people as individuals are going to become empowered, and that I think you can translate also to different communities of people are going to be able to connect and to transact and trust each other in new ways, and that's going to empower new communities, whether they're connected by nation states or identity politics.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also would add on what you just said, that actually the traditional power structure, they're just adapting it, and this is absolutely happening. And of course they will not just say, okay, now you take over. Of course they will not. And so there is this kind of battle that I see, cultural battle in the sense that actually the traditional systems, they are taking it on, they're absorbing it, will try to control it with regulation, with kind of, like the money system. Also in our law is like written down that only the state is allowed to issue money. And I think also of all these, and there's a reason why this is so, because the state has then the power over the whole money system. And so there is this kind of traditional power structures which are just absorbing it, and then so they will try to empower themselves through it. But there's a kind of a form of, I would call it a tech polis, so the polis in the old Greek sense. But there is a very nerdy group right now of developers, if it is around Ethereum or or IOTA or all these kind of well-known platforms, and they are kind of defining how is this parallel world look like right now, and it's kind of, I think it looks like a race between them, and it's empowering them very much, and they see it's not about money, it's about the structure.
So I guess since we're ending, I'll also answer this on like a positive note of what I'd like to see. And I would really like to see blockchain bring about in political and economic spheres more multiplicity of choices. And there's a potential that it won't do that and become a standard and be interoperable forever. So I really like thinking of with Cosmos or other projects, an internet of blockchains, something in the plural, because while it is true that for the, in recent memory, mostly states have printed money, there also has been, like, say, during the Industrial Revolution, like, factories would often, like, the Royal Mint wouldn't mint lower denomination coins, so factories started minting lower denomination coins to draw workers in. But there's also things like in Catalonia, the ICO, a local currency that's used between a lot of different cooperatives. So I'd really like to see blockchain enable these types of smaller communities and also enable their link to the outside world at the same time. So there's a multiplicity of choices, less isolation, choice of interoperability, but not a mandate of interoperability.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insights here. We want, before we close now the round, let's open it to the audience. So if you have any questions to Caroline, Andrea, or Kia, here's a microphone. Just raise up your hand. The young couple over there, I bet it on you.
You take it. Okay. Oh, cool. Service.
Thank you very much. Impressive exchange, honestly, in terms of knowledge, multidisciplinary. So really thank you for that. Question to you, Caroline. You said you are experiencing, if I understood correctly, in ConsenSys, this decentralized organization. I work for Airbus, a big organization. I dream of it as being more agile in the future because we are big. We are many thousands right now. Can you give us some insights about some things which can be applied as quick wins, and then maybe your vision for a big company, how to organize itself?
Thanks for that question. It's definitely not an easy one to answer because in the case of ConsenSys, we started out knowing that we didn't want to be a traditional company and left a lot of the freedom and openness from the beginning, and it's grown organically. But for a larger company who's looking to try some of these things, I'd say that you want to think about decentralized structure on 3 levels. At the individual level, the team level, and at the organizational level. It's kind of like an ecological system is how I like to think about it. So to actually decentralize something and make it become less hierarchical, you have to focus on all three areas. In the individual level, you have to teach people how to communicate with folks. If there's no structure that dictates how you interact with people, you need to teach skills for individuals to know how to communicate. Team level, you mentioned Agile, that's something that we use at ConsenSys too, in teaching teams and leaders how to use Agile to empower all people on their team to work together. And then the org level, there's a lot of structural work that you have to do to think about how do you decentralize decision making and governance and structure something in a brand new way so it doesn't just look like a triangle, so it takes some thought.
Okay. Any further questions on your side? Then let's...
There's one more question.
There's one more question. Oh yeah, please.
The idea of having blockchain empowering small communities to be more included into the global system is a great idea, but the problem is that when I try to imagine it, I cannot see it. For example, if I take a community in Africa, for example, how can these people participate if they are not educated? So for me, there is like a first step that should be addressed, which is education, in order to enable these people to be empowered via blockchain. So how do you think this can be addressed?
Education. Do you have a specific person?
Because for example, let's say, how can blockchain help people if the very first thing, which is education, is not there? How can this person participate into the blockchain? And this, for me, this very first step is really the basics. And I don't know if there is someone addressing it today, or are we just talking about the blockchain as something we would like to use in order to help people?
Thank you for the question.
I mean, I definitely don't have a definitive answer, but I would say B9 Lab is a lab for blockchain education, and I know they've integrated with, they work with ConsenSys. And I would say that I would really like to see a few companies in this space really set a precedent and a standard for a certain amount of focus and resources towards education first, because those resources are there, but a few people need to set that precedent first and really follow through on it.
It's a huge problem, the digital divide. It's and I would also agree, that it's kind of even getting bigger in a certain sense, because the programmers in this, or the developers in this area, they are not they are the best ones, I would say. They are really extremely driven, highly smart, and so even there is a kind of sort of an elite already who is creating this stuff. And but I would also add, when you look into the mobile technology, for instance, to Africa in particular. So while you had here, we transformed, into the internet, and then mobile phone came in Africa, they jumped directly to the mobile technology, because but this can also happen in Africa, and a lot of projects there through the GIG Foundation, which is related to Republica in Berlin, who are actually portraying a lot of interesting projects which are they're arising out of they have internet access, they teach themselves, and they create out of a super small energy grids, for instance. Because the first thing is, okay, you have to have energy to run a computer, to teach yourself, and with this, they kind of teach whole communities and set up amazing projects there out of nothing, and it's also very impressive. So if their people are driven, they can actually easier teach themselves these days than years before. But still, the question is digital divide. It's a very specific group of people and a specific group of intelligence you have to have in the end to enter this space, for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is a good final word. It's a good idea to be driven, and then you can reach your aims. So thank you so much